When 8-year-old Lily saw the giant biker step into the road, she knew she had only one chance. She had been taught by her father to be small, to be quiet, to not make a fuss when danger was near. But the lessons of silence had failed her. Now, trapped in the back of a strange, stale-smelling car with two people whose eyes were as cold as winter stone, she understood a new lesson. Sometimes, the only way to be saved is to make a sound so loud it cannot be ignored. The desperate act of pushing the biker out of the path of the speeding car he had not seen was more than just a warning. It was a scream for help that set off a chain of events, unraveling a dark secret and forging an unbreakable bond between a lost little girl and the one man who truly saw her. The Saturday afternoon sun was warm and lazy, casting long shadows across the tidy lawns of Maple Street. It was the kind of street that existed in brochures for quiet living, where the loudest sound was usually a lawnmower or the distant jingle of an ice cream truck. Everything was in its place. The sky was a placid blue, the hedges were neatly trimmed, and the illusion of safety was as thick and comforting as the summer air itself. It was this very illusion that Michael, known to his brothers as Sticks, was enjoying. At 52, he moved with a deliberate calm that belied the immense power in his frame. He was a mountain of a man, clad in the worn leather cut of the Iron Sentinels Motorcycle Club. The vest was a roadmap of his life, patches for long rides, memorials for fallen friends, and at the center, the club's emblem of a stoic, winged warrior. His arms, etched with faded tattoos from his youth and newer, sharper ones from recent years, told their own stories. Sticks was not a man who sought trouble. His life had already been filled with enough of it. For 25 years, he had been a firefighter, a man who ran toward chaos when every human instinct screamed to run away. He had seen the worst that fire and fate could do to people. He carried the ghosts of those he could not save in the quiet depths of his gray eyes. When he retired, the silence was deafening. The Motorcycle Club, a brotherhood of men like him, veterans, former cops, fellow first responders, had filled that silence with the rumble of engines and the easy comfort of shared understanding. He had just left a small, family-owned hardware store, a simple roll of duct tape and a plastic bag dangling from his hand. His motorcycle, a gleaming black Harley-Davidson Road King, was parked a block away. It was his therapy, his church, his escape. He was walking toward it, the sun warm on the back of his neck, thinking of nothing more than the open road and the wind. That was when he noticed the car. It was a nondescript blue sedan, a decade old at least, with a fading clear coat and a spiderweb crack in the passenger side window. It was moving too slowly, crawling along the curb at a pace that was entirely out of place on the quiet street. It felt predatory. Sticks's internal alarm, the one honed by a quarter-century of assessing scenes for hidden dangers before his crew went in, gave a faint, insistent ping. He saw the driver, a man with a thin, twitchy face, his eyes darting constantly to the rearview mirror. In the passenger seat sat a woman with stringy, bleached hair. Her face was a mask of tense impatience. But it was the small figure in the back seat who held his attention. A little girl. She was sitting perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a bright pink t-shirt that seemed too big for her small frame, and her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, but a few strands had escaped, clinging to her pale, sweat-sheened forehead. She was staring straight ahead, her expression unnervingly blank. A child on a sunny afternoon should be fidgeting, or looking out the window, or annoying the adults in the front seat. This girl was doing none of that. She was like a doll placed carefully on a shelf. Sticks saw the woman in the front seat turn and say something sharp. He could not hear the words, but he saw the girl flinch. He saw the woman's hand, knuckles white, gripping the top of the girl's arm. It was not a comforting touch. It was an anchor. It was a threat. He knew that look. He had seen it on the faces of children pulled from broken homes, their bodies rigid with the learned behavior of survival. They learned to make themselves small, to become invisible, to not provoke the monster they lived with. He saw that knowledge in this little girl's posture. He slowed his walk, turning his body slightly to keep the car in his peripheral vision. His mind, once trained to look for flashpoints and structural weaknesses, was now scanning for details. The license plate was from out of state. The temporary tag in the back window was peeling off. The man and woman in the front did not look like parents on a family outing. They looked like captors. He felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He told himself he was overthinking it. He was a retired firefighter, not a cop. It was probably just a family having a bad day. A tired, cranky kid. Overwrought parents. He had seen it 1,000 times. But his instincts, the gut feeling that had kept him alive in smoke-filled hallways, screamed that he was wrong. This was different. This was not a family. This was a cage on wheels. He continued walking, forcing a casual pace, but every nerve was on high alert. He saw the car's brake lights flicker. It was still moving at a crawl, pacing him. Were they watching him? The thought sent a jolt of ice through his veins. The man's eyes met his in the rearview mirror for a split second, and the look in them was not one of curiosity. It was hostile. It was a warning. Styx was about to cross a small intersection, a side street that fed onto the main road. He stopped at the curb, glancing left and right out of habit. The blue sedan was just behind him now, close enough that he could smell the faint, acrid scent of its exhaust. He could feel the low thrum of its engine. He took a step off the curb into the street, and then everything happened at once. The blue sedan, which had been moving so slowly, suddenly roared. The engine screamed as the driver stomped on the accelerator. At the exact same moment, the back door on his side flew open. Out of the corner of his eye, Styx saw a flash of pink. He felt a small, surprisingly firm shove against his hip. It was not a powerful push, not enough to truly move a man his size, but it was so unexpected that it broke his balance. He stumbled backward, his boot catching on the curb, and he fell heavily onto the grass verge of the sidewalk. A blur of red shot past where he had been standing a second before. A sports car, driven by a teenager oblivious to the world beyond his blaring music, had come screeching around the blind corner. It had not even slowed for the stop sign. It whipped through the intersection, the wind from its passage rustling the leaves on the trees. If Styx had not been pushed, the car would have hit him squarely. He sat there for a stunned second, the breath knocked out of him, his mind trying to process the near miss. But then he looked up at the blue sedan as it sped away. The back door was still swinging open. The little girl, Lily, was being violently yanked back inside by the woman. He heard the man scream, a guttural roar of pure fury. And in that one fleeting moment, before the door was slammed shut, the little girl's eyes met his. There was no childish mischief in them. There was no pride at having saved him. There was only a vast, deep, bottomless ocean of terror. It was a silent, desperate plea. It was the look of a soul crying out from behind a locked door. In that instant, Styx understood everything. The slow crawl of the car. The shove. It had not been random. She had seen the speeding car coming. She had seen him step into the road. And in a split second of impossible bravery, she had used his own danger as an alarm for hers. She had pushed him to safety to get him to look, to get him to see. His blood did not run cold. It ignited. The firefighter in him, the rescuer, the man whose entire life had been defined by acting when the bell rang, awoke from its quiet retirement. The scene was no longer a quiet suburban street. It was a 5-alarm fire, and there was a person trapped inside. He did not think. He did not weigh the risks of getting involved or the possibility of being wrong. He had seen the girl's eyes. He knew. He scrambled to his feet, his body aching from the fall, but flooded with adrenaline that numbed the pain. He ignored the teenager in the red sports car who had screeched to a halt and was now staring at him with a wide, guilty face. Styx ran. His boots pounded against the pavement, each step a hammer blow of purpose. The blue sedan was already a block away, turning right at the end of the street. He fumbled in his pocket, his fingers closing around the cool, familiar metal of his motorcycle keys. He reached his bike, a monument of chrome and black steel. He threw a leg over the saddle, the worn leather groaning in protest. The key found the ignition by feel alone. With a twist of his wrist, the big V-twin engine exploded to life, a deep, guttural roar that shattered the afternoon's peace. It was the sound of impending thunder. He did not waste a second. He clicked the comms unit on his helmet, the system connecting instantly to his phone. He hit the speed dial for his club's president. "Preacher, you there?" he barked, his voice tight. The voice that came back was calm, steady as a rock. "What's wrong, Styx?" "I have a possible child abduction, a little girl. Blue 4-door sedan, beat to hell. Out-of-state plate. I think it started with a 73B. I didn't get the rest. They're heading north on Elm, just turned onto the bypass. There was no hesitation on the other end of the line. No questions, no doubt. That was the code of the Iron Sentinels. When a brother called for help, you answered. Call 911, preacher. Give them the description. I'm in pursuit. I'm just going to keep a visual. Copy that, preacher said. Eyes up, brother. Help is on the way. Sticks clicked off the comms, twisted the throttle, and the Harley surged forward. He was not a vigilante. He was not trying to be a hero. He was just a man who had been given a message, and he would be damned if he let the messenger disappear into the void. The chase was on. The suburban streets gave way to the wider, faster lanes of the highway bypass. The blue sedan was a few hundred yards ahead, weaving recklessly through the light traffic. The driver knew he was being followed. He was panicking. Sticks kept his distance. His job was not to engage, it was to observe, to be a living, breathing tracking device that the authorities could home in on. He settled into the rhythm of the chase, his mind becoming a cold, calculating machine. He noted every lane change, every near miss the sedan had with other cars. He was a shepherd, and his flock was a single, terrified little girl in a cage. Within minutes, he heard a familiar rumble behind him, then another to his left. He glanced in his mirror and saw the headlights of two more Harleys. It was Bear and Gizmo, two of his club brothers. They had been at the clubhouse, a few miles away, and had responded instantly to Preacher's call. They did not pull up alongside him. They did not try to pass. They fell into formation behind him, a silent, formidable trio of guardians. Soon, more bikes appeared, filtering onto the highway from different on-ramps. The Iron Sentinels were assembling. They formed a loose, rolling perimeter, not to intimidate or to escalate, but to create a net. They became extra sets of eyes, blocking potential exit ramps simply by occupying the space, ensuring the blue sedan had nowhere to go but forward. The driver of the sedan saw them. Sticks watched the car swerve violently as the man's panic escalated into full-blown terror. He was boxed in not by force, but by presence. Then, in the distance, Sticks saw it. The flash of red and blue lights. The sound of sirens grew from a faint whine to a piercing wail. Two state police cruisers were closing fast, guided by the 911 dispatcher who was getting real-time updates from Preacher, who was in turn getting them from the bikers on the road. The police did not hesitate. They were professionals. They saw the sedan, saw the rolling escort of motorcycles, and understood the situation instantly. One cruiser sped past Sticks and the other bikers, its sirens screaming, while the second one moved to the sedan's left flank. The lead cruiser positioned itself perfectly. Sticks watched, his heart in his throat, as the officer behind the wheel executed a flawless pit maneuver. The cruiser's front bumper tapped the sedan's rear quarter panel. The car spun out of control. It went into a wild, sickening 180-degree spin, tires screeching in protest against the asphalt. It slammed backward into the steel guardrail with a brutal crunch of metal and glass. The chase was over. Before the dust had even settled, officers were out of their cruisers, weapons drawn, shouting commands. "Show me your hands! Get out of the car! Now!" The man and woman from the sedan stumbled out, dazed and disoriented. They were met with the unyielding reality of law enforcement. They were pushed to the ground, handcuffed, and secured with swift, practiced efficiency. The threat was neutralized. Sticks pulled his bike over to the shoulder, a safe distance away, and cut the engine. The sudden silence was jarring. The other members of the Iron Sentinels did the same, lining their bikes up behind his, their engines dying one by one. They had done their part. Now, they were just silent witnesses. Sticks's eyes were locked on the back door of the wrecked sedan. He watched as a female officer approached it cautiously. She opened the door gently. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the officer leaned inside. Sticks saw her talking, her voice calm and reassuring even from this distance. A small figure emerged, wrapped in the officer's protective embrace. It was the girl, Lily. She was crying but silently, her small body shaking with tremors of shock and fear. Another officer brought a thick blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. A paramedic knelt beside her, checking her for injuries. Sticks let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding for the last 15 minutes. He stayed on his bike, his hands resting on the handlebars, feeling the residual heat of the engine. He had no place over there. This was a scene for uniforms and professionals. He was just the guy who answered the call. A few minutes later, a police sergeant, a man with a weathered face and tired eyes, walked over to him. He stopped a few feet from the motorcycle, his expression one of weary respect. "You're the one who called it in?" the sergeant asked. Sticks nodded. "My club president called 911. I just kept eyes on them." The sergeant looked back at the chaotic scene, then back at Sticks and the line of bikers behind him. An amber alert for that little girl went out an hour ago. She was taken from a park 300 miles from here yesterday. We've been looking for that car all morning. He paused, then added, "The dispatcher said she pushed you out of the way of a car?" "Yeah," Sticks said, his voice raspy. "She did." The sergeant shook his head in disbelief. An 8-year-old girl, in the middle of all that, saves a stranger to get noticed. Kid's a hero. He looked Sticks in the eye. "You did good. You and your friends. You read this right, and you didn't go cowboy. You let us do our job. On behalf of my department, thank you." Sticks just gave a short, sharp nod. Validation was not why he did it, but it settled something deep inside him. He was about to start his bike, to gather his brothers and fade back into the anonymity of the highway, when he heard a small voice. "Wait!" He turned. The little girl, Lily, was walking toward him. She had a teddy bear clutched in one hand, a gift from one of the paramedics. The female officer was walking with her, a gentle hand on her shoulder. Lily stopped right in front of his motorcycle. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and red-rimmed from crying, but the terror in them was gone. It had been replaced by something else. Awe. Gratitude. She let go of the officer's hand, took 2 steps forward and wrapped her small arms around his leg, burying her face in the rough, dusty denim of his jeans. Sticks froze. The simple, trusting gesture hit him with more force than the fall on the sidewalk. He felt a dam break inside him, a flood of emotion he had kept locked away for years. He clumsily swung his leg over his bike and knelt down on the asphalt, bringing himself to her level. The ground was gritty and hard on his old knees, but he did not care. He gently placed a hand on her small, trembling back. She looked up at him, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She spoke in a whisper so quiet he had to lean in to hear it. "Thank you," she said. "You saw me." 2 words. You saw me. It was not about the chase. It was not about the police or the capture. It was that in a world that had become a blur of fear and invisibility, one person had looked past the surface and had truly seen her. Sticks could not find any words. He just nodded, his throat tight, and squeezed her shoulder gently. In that moment, he was not Sticks the biker or Michael the retired firefighter. He was just the man an 8-year-old girl had trusted with her life. A short time later, another car arrived, this one screeching to a halt with far more desperation than the police cruisers. A man and a woman burst out, their faces etched with a year's worth of fear. "Lily!" the woman cried. The little girl's head snapped up. "Mommy! Daddy!" She let go of Sticks and ran, a blur of pink and brown hair, straight into her parents' arms. The reunion was a chaotic, beautiful storm of tears and laughter and desperate hugs. They held her as if they might never let go, checking every inch of her, whispering her name over and over again. After a few minutes, once the initial wave of frantic relief had passed, the sergeant explained to the parents what had happened. He pointed towards Sticks, who was now standing awkwardly by his bike, surrounded by his equally awkward, leather-clad brothers. Lily's father, his face still wet with tears, approached him. He was a man of average height and build, a software engineer or an accountant, someone from a world utterly different from Sticks's. But in that moment, they were just 2 men connected by the most important thing in the world. I don't know what to say," the father stammered, his voice thick with emotion. He extended a hand. "My name is Tom. This is my wife, Sarah. You saved our daughter." Sticks shook his hand. "Your daughter saved me first," he said simply. "She's the brave one." Sarah, Lily's mother, came forward, and without a word, wrapped her arms around Sticks in a fierce hug. "Thank you," she sobbed into his leather vest. "Thank you for seeing our little girl." Sticks just stood there, patting her back clumsily, as the Iron Sentinels watched in respectful silence. They were men of iron and leather, but not a single one of them was immune to the profound, unassailable power of a family made whole again. 5 years later, the world had moved on. The sun-drenched Saturday had faded into memory for most, but for a few, it remained a pivotal, defining moment. The man and woman who had taken Lily were serving long sentences in federal prison. They were part of a trafficking ring that the information from their capture had helped to dismantle. Their darkness had been exposed to the light. For Lily, the journey back had been long. There were nightmares at first, and a fear of cars and strangers. She had worked with therapists, patient and kind people, who helped her put the pieces of her world back together. But she was not broken. The core of her, the part that had found the courage to push a stranger to safety, was made of something stronger than fear. Now, at 13, she was thriving. She was tall and confident, with the same bright eyes, but now they shone with laughter instead of terror. She was the captain of her school's junior safety patrol. With her parents' blessing, she had even spoken at community events, sharing her story not for attention, but to teach other kids the importance of awareness and trusting their gut. She was not defined by what had happened to her, but by how she had survived it. And through it all, she had an unlikely guardian angel. Sticks, or Uncle Sticks, as she now called him, had become a permanent fixture in her life. The bond forged on that strip of highway had not faded. It had deepened, settling into the comfortable rhythm of family. He never missed a school play or a soccer game. His booming, off-key cheering was a source of endless embarrassment and secret pride for her. Every Christmas, a card with a picture of a tough-looking Santa on a motorcycle would arrive. Every birthday, he would show up with a gift that was always slightly inappropriate, but chosen with immense care. He was the gruff, tattooed, leather-clad uncle who could silence a room with his presence, but would sit for hours listening to her talk about school or friends, or whatever was on her mind. His quiet life had found a new, brilliant center. The event had changed the Iron Sentinels, too. The story had spread, first locally, then further. They were no longer just seen as a group of intimidating men on loud machines. They were seen as guardians. Inspired by what had happened, Preacher and Sticks had spearheaded a new initiative. They started a foundation calling it the Sentinels Watch. Partnering with national organizations for missing and exploited children, they used the club's network and resources to fund awareness campaigns and organize volunteer groups for searches. They put up posters in truck stops and diners, places the official channels sometimes missed. They became a network of thousands of eyes on the road, always watching, always vigilant. An army of unlikely protectors. The final scene of this chapter unfolded on a bright, sunny afternoon, almost identical to that one 5 years ago. It was Lily's 13th birthday party. The backyard of her family's home was filled with balloons, streamers, and a dozen loud, happy teenagers. Sticks sat at a picnic table slightly apart from the main chaos, a can of soda in his hand. He watched as Lily, now officially a teenager, laughed with her friends, her face alight with pure, uncomplicated joy. Her father, Tom, came and sat beside him, handing him a plate with a large slice of cake. "Look at her," Tom said, his voice filled with a quiet wonder that had never left him. Happy. Safe. Sticks nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "That she is." "She has your picture on her desk," Tom continued. "The one from the newspaper article. You, her, and the bike. She says it reminds her that there are good people everywhere. You just have to know how to look for them." Sticks watched as Lily caught his eye from across the yard. She gave him a huge, goofy wave. He raised his soda can in a silent toast back to her. He thought back to that day, to the simple act of walking down a quiet street. He had learned a profound lesson. It was not about being a hero. It was not about being the strongest or the toughest. It was about paying attention. It was about listening to that quiet voice inside that says something is not right. It was about seeing a fellow human being in distress and refusing, absolutely refusing, to look away. The greatest rescues, he knew now, did not always start with a siren or a shout. Sometimes they started with a whisper. Sometimes they started with a little girl's desperate, brave push. And sometimes all it took was for someone to stop, to look, and to truly see.